I discovered the truth while holding my sister's casserole dish. It was a Wednesday evening in late October, that awkward hour when Denver's weather couldn't decide between warmth and cold, and I was washing dishes while Lauren gave Noah his bath upstairs. Evan had stepped into the home office to take a call. The kitchen was quiet except for the sound of water running, the occasional creak of the old house settling into evening. My hands were in the soapy water when I heard it, Evan's voice carrying down from the second floor, somewhere near their bedroom. At first, I wasn't listening intentionally. Then I heard my name, and my hands went still. But what about Megan? That was Evan, uncertain, the way he always sounded when he was about to agree with something he didn't fully believe in. What about her? Lauren's voice had that particular edge to it. I'd learned to recognize it over the past 8 months. It was the tone she used when making a decision that had already been made. The deal closed yesterday. We're cash positive now. We don't need. A door shut. Not quite a slam, but deliberate. I stood there with a soapy plate in my hands, watching the suds slide off into the drain, feeling something crystallize in my chest that I immediately tried not to name. I finished the dishes. That's what I did. That's what I always did. But my mind had already begun the work of reconstructing everything. Let me back up to where this actually began. I had graduated from the University of Colorado in May with my master's degree in interior design. I had a job offer from Meridian Design Studio, a respected firm in downtown Denver with a strong reputation for commercial work. The job started in August. In between, there was July, that peculiar month of freedom and disorientation that follows the end of one life and the beginning of another. I had been living in Fort Collins during graduate school in a small apartment I shared with 2 other graduate students. By May, that apartment had been rented to new people. I had a job in Denver. I did not yet have an apartment in Denver. The market was brutal. Anything remotely affordable was already leased or required first, last, and security deposit up front. I was solvent but not wealthy. Fresh out of graduate school, my student loans were still pending their first payment. My parents, who live in Kansas, suggested I spend the summer with my older sister Lauren. She and her husband Evan had bought a house in a Denver suburb 3 years prior. They had a 6-year-old son, Noah. Lauren worked as a freelance branding consultant. Evan worked in real estate development. They had space. Just for the summer, my mother said. Just until you find something. Lauren said she'd love to have you. Lauren, when I called her directly, was enthusiastic. Of course. The guest room is basically sitting empty. And it'll be fun for Noah to have you around. Plus, we could use the help with him when I'm swamped with work. What she didn't say, but what I understood implicitly, was this: Lauren and Evan were not wealthy yet. They were building. Evan's business was in expansion mode. Lauren was taking on more clients. Childcare was expensive. Help, free or nearly free, was valuable. What I didn't yet understand was that I was not being invited as family. I was being invited as an asset. I moved in on July 2nd with my car full of possessions, the important things, the things I'd thought to prioritize. My design textbooks. My portfolio. My clothing. My laptop. The rest would come later, I thought. The guest room was small but clean. Lauren had made an effort: fresh linens, a reading lamp, a small vase with flowers from her garden. It felt genuinely kind. I remember walking into that room and feeling, for the first time in weeks, the tension in my shoulders ease. I was tired. I was uncertain. I was grateful. Welcome home, Lauren said, standing in the doorway. She was already showing signs of pregnancy, though she wouldn't announce it for another month. She had that particular glow and softness that only she seemed to notice in herself. Mi casser es su casser. I believed her. I lived there for 9 months. During that time, I paid rent. Not the full going rate for a guest room. Lauren wouldn't accept that, but $700 a month, which she insisted was only to cover utilities and groceries. It was actually far below market rate, but it wasn't free, and this detail became important later. Cooked dinner 4 nights a week. Carefully planned meals that worked with Evan's late work schedule and Noah's unpredictable appetite. Grocery shopping on Saturday mornings, standing in the aisles of the Whole Foods on Spee Boulevard, comparing prices, always comparing prices. Cleaned the house on Sundays, sometimes on midweek evenings when things got chaotic. Bathrooms, floors, kitchen, the endless accumulation of toys and papers and living. Watched Noah before school, after school, on days when Lauren had client calls or meetings. Braided his hair. Packed his lunches. Listened to his elaborate fantasies about dinosaurs and space travel. Became, in many ways, the person he went to first when he was confused or hurt or excited about something. Drove to appointments. Made phone calls. Helped with logistics. Worked. Always worked. In August, I started at Meridian. The office was in the art district, in a converted warehouse with enormous windows and exposed brick. My desk faced north. I could see the mountains from where I Saturday. In the morning, when the sun hit the glass, the whole studio filled with gold. I loved it immediately. My first project was the redesign of a boutique hotel lobby in Loudoun. Then a medical office building in Cherry Creek. Then a corporate headquarters expansion. The work was demanding and real, and exactly what I wanted to be doing. I was good at it. My colleagues noticed. My supervisors were pleased. But I was also exhausted in a way that seemed to have no name. I would drive home from the office, 30 minutes south to the suburbs, and feel the exhaustion press against me like a physical weight. Then I would walk into a house that was not mine and be grateful for it anyway. The warning signs were subtle. A certain tightness around Lauren's smile when I mentioned I'd been offered the lead on a major downtown project. A comment from Evan about how much Lauren appreciated her little sister's help, phrased in a way that felt like gratitude and obligation all at once. The way Lauren's phone calls with clients happened behind closed doors now, whereas before they'd been casual. The sound of her voice on Zoom calls, more confident, more assured. The way she spoke about her potential opportunities and her positioning ourselves for growth. The first time I understood something was shifting was in October, when Lauren called a family meeting. We sat in their living room after Noah had gone to bed. Lauren was several months pregnant, her belly preceding her like a promise. She had that luminous quality that pregnancy gives some women, the sense of being separate from ordinary human concerns, of being vessels for something larger than themselves. She used this quality expertly. It made her harder to contradict. "We want to talk to you about the future," she said, glancing at Evan, who looked uncomfortable. "Not necessarily right now, but sometime in the next few months. We're hoping you'll have found your own place by then. The baby's coming in March, and we'll need the guest room for a nursery." This was reasonable. Expected. I had always known I would move out eventually. This was just a timeline being established. "Of course," I said. "I'm already looking. It's just, the market is really tight right now." "I know," Lauren said, and she did sound sympathetic. "But you're doing so well at Meridian. In another few months, you'll be able to afford something nice. I just wanted to give you a heads up so you could start thinking about it more seriously." Evan nodded. He was trying to make his face supportive. I said it was fine. Everything was fine. I was grateful for the timeline. I would start looking more aggressively. No problem. But something in me had shifted. The safety I'd felt in that first week, that ease in my shoulders, it didn't return quite as fully. Megan Whitaker, at 28 years old, was excellent at reading the architecture of human relationships. It came naturally to me, this ability to see the structure beneath the surface, to understand how things were being held together. Maybe that's why I became a designer. I had always been looking for the bones underneath the skin. So when I started observing Lauren and Evan more carefully, I was not shocked by what I found. I was saddened, but not shocked. In early November, I was in the office working late. The sun had set at 5:30. The mountains had disappeared into darkness. I was the only person left in the studio except for Rachel Moore, a co-worker who had been hired in September. She was young, recently transplanted from Arizona, ambitious, and fundamentally kind in a way that didn't yet seem to have been worn down by the world. We ordered Thai food and spread it across the long table in the break room. Rachel told me about her move to Denver. I asked her why she'd left Arizona. It's a long story, she said. Short version, I was in a bad situation, decided I needed to start over, found this job, and took it. Sometimes you just have to burn everything down and rebuild. There was something in the way she said this that told me she had lived it, not just thought about it. I lived in my car for 3 months, as she added, almost casually, scooping green curry into her mouth. During the winter before last. It sucked. But I got through it, found a steady job, and now I have an apartment that's actually kind of nice. It's possible to come back from something like that. I remember looking at her, this woman who couldn't have been more than 5 years younger than me, who seemed to hold her own difficult history like a stone she'd learned to carry, and thinking, I'm going to need this information. I didn't know that yet, though. I was still operating under the assumption that I could control the timeline, that my job security and my growing savings would be enough to navigate the housing market, that Lauren's comment had simply been a gentle logistics discussion. I was wrong. In the middle of November, I accidentally saw something I wasn't supposed to see. Lauren had left her laptop open on the kitchen counter. She was upstairs putting Noah to bed. The screen had gone dark, but when I walked past, the light from the refrigerator I'd just opened woke it back up. An email was visible in her inbox. The subject line read, "A congratulations on your new contract, $250,000 award." I didn't mean to read it. I was getting milk for my morning coffee. But once I saw that number, once I registered what it meant, I couldn't look away. The email was from a branding firm, a major one, offering Lauren a contract as a creative director. The starting salary was $250,000. The position began January 1st. Lauren, my older sister who had always been careful about money, who had spoken about finances in a specific coded language of worry and planning, had just secured a $250,000 job. She would no longer need my $700 a month. She would no longer need my help with Noah. She would no longer need me. I closed the refrigerator door carefully. I didn't take the milk. I went upstairs to my room and sat on the edge of the bed and understood, quite clearly, that I had misread the arrangement from the very beginning. What happened next unfolded with the inevitability of an architectural design executing exactly as intended. Lauren didn't tell me about the job for 2 weeks. I watched her not tell me. I watched her take calls behind closed doors. I watched her energy shift from anxious to purposeful. I watched her stop asking me to help with Noah's school drop-offs. I watched the way she looked at me in the kitchen, with something like calculation moving behind her eyes. She told me on December 1st, on a Monday evening, while we were both in the kitchen and Noah was in the living room watching television. I got a job, she said, the words coming out almost rehearsed. A really good one. It starts in January. I'll be working full-time, which means a lot more stability for us. Evan and I were actually going to talk to you about this. We've been thinking about how we want to structure the house with the baby coming. That's amazing, EI said. And I meant it, even though I knew what was coming. Congratulations. That's huge. Thank you. The thing is, now that we'll be in a better financial position, we really want to make sure the house is set up the way we want it. For the baby, for Noah, for us as a family. She smiled, but it was a careful smile, diplomatic. We think it's probably time for you to start making more concrete plans about moving out. Maybe sooner rather than later. We were thinking, ideally, maybe by the end of January. That was 6 weeks away. I had looked at apartments. I had checked listings. Every single place in any neighborhood that didn't require an hour commute to my office was renting for at least $1,600 a month. Most wanted first, last, and security deposit up front. That was nearly $5,000 just to move in. I had maybe $12,000 in savings. My student loans would be hitting in 2 months. My car was aging, reliable, but aging. That's pretty soon, EI said, trying to keep my voice level. The housing market is really... I know, Lauren said, with a sympathy that I now understood was performed. It's tight. But you have a good job, right? Your boss seems to like your work. You'll figure it out. People always do. People always do. Yeah, EI said. Yeah, okay. I'll figure it out. Great, Lauren said, smiling the same diplomatic smile. We really appreciate everything you've done for us. You're the best sister. Here is what I didn't do. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I didn't tell her that this was unfair or cruel or strategically timed. I didn't point out the hypocrisy of using me when she needed me and discarding me when she didn't. I didn't allow myself to feel the full magnitude of the betrayal. Here is what I did instead. I made calculations. I looked at my bank account. I searched rental listings with a fever I tried to hide. I contacted apartments that wouldn't call back for weeks. I began the process of mentally downsizing my life. But I also began noticing other things. 3 days after Lauren's announcement, I came home to find my room partially dismantled. Several boxes had appeared, and various items of mine had been moved into them, not all of them, but certain things. My extra bedding. Some of my winter clothing. A few books from my shelf. Oh, Lauren said when she saw me standing in the doorway. I was just trying to get ahead on packing for you. I figured you'd want to start thinking about what you need and what you don't. But I'm not moving until the end of January, EI said quietly. I know, but it's good to get a head start, right? Less stressful that way. It was hostile, I understood. Not in any way I could point to directly, but hostile nonetheless. It was a way of saying, you are already leaving. You are already gone. I am simply documenting what you are no longer allowed to have here. 3 days after that, I came home to find that my Wi-Fi password had been changed. When I asked Evan about it, he was more likely to be reasonable than Lauren. He looked embarrassed. Lauren thought the connection was getting slow, he said. She reset the router. She'll give you the new password. Lauren, when I asked her, made an elaborate show of looking confused. Oh, I didn't think about you working from home. You work from the office though, right? You don't really need Wi-Fi here. I needed Wi-Fi there. I worked on projects at night. I sent emails. I kept backup files. But more than that, the message was clear. You are no longer a member of this household. You are a guest, and a guest whose welcome is actively being withdrawn. That night, I went to Rachel's apartment. She answered the door in sweatpants and a northwestern hoodie, her hair piled on top of her head, and looked at me with the kind of immediate understanding that comes from having been places you don't want to be. "Do you want to come in?" she asked. I sat on her couch, comfortable, worn, clearly salvaged from somewhere, and told her everything. Not in an organized way. Not with the narrative structure I'm providing you now. Just in the fragmented, painful way that people tell their stories when they're still inside them. When the shape hasn't yet become clear. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "Do you have anywhere to go?" "Not really. I have a few weeks to find something." "I have a couch," Rachel said. "If you end up needing it." I believe that was the moment I started to understand that there were different kinds of family. Not the family you were born into, but the family you found. The family that appeared when you needed it, not because they were obligated, but because they were paying attention. By mid-December, the situation had become openly hostile. Evan had, in a moment of weakness or honesty, admitted to me that the accusations Lauren had begun making were false. She had told him, and by extension, had been implying to others, that I had been entertaining a strangersy in my room, that I was being disruptive, that she didn't feel safe with my lifestyle choices around Noah. There had been no strangers. There were no lifestyle choices to question. But the narrative, once introduced, had a life of its own. "She's stressed about the baby," Evan said, which was his way of excusing behavior that needed no excuse. "She's worried about money even though we have more now. She's overwhelmed. She fired me because her job came through," I said, quite clearly, looking directly at him. "She doesn't need me anymore. So she made a reason to not need me. That's not stress. That's strategy." Evan looked away. He had never been good at direct confrontation. His specialty was subtle enablement, the kind of casual agreement that allowed worse things to happen. "I'm sorry," he said finally, and I think he meant it. But sorry doesn't restructure reality. Sorry doesn't change the fact that your sister has decided you're inconvenient, and has begun the process of making that inconvenience official. My parents called me on December 22nd. My mother's voice had that particular combination of concern and accusation that I recognized from my childhood. It meant she had heard something from Lauren and had decided it was true. "Megan, Lauren's a little worried about some of your choices while you've been living there. She wants to be supportive, but she's concerned about the environment for Noah." "What choices?" I asked. She didn't want to get into specifics. She just said you've had people over, and she's not comfortable with it. "Mom, I haven't had anyone over. Ever. I work 60 hours a week and spend the rest of my time reading or sleeping." "Honey, I'm sure you have a reason for whatever you're—" "I'm not doing anything," I said, and I could hear my voice cracking, which made me furious. "Lauren needs me out of the house because she doesn't need my rent money anymore. So she's making this up. She's lying. That's what's happening." My mother said something about not wanting to get involved in sibling drama. My father, who got on the phone, suggested that maybe I had been a burden and just hadn't realized it. Maybe it was time for me to stand on my own 2 feet anyway. I hung up the phone and walked into the living room and told Lauren I would be out by December 30th. She looked genuinely surprised, as though she hadn't orchestrated this entire situation. "Oh honey, I didn't mean for you to feel like you had to rush." "I'm not rushing," I said, very quietly. "I'm complying with your timeline. So you're getting what you wanted. Congratulations." Rachel picked me up in her Honda CR-V on December 29th. I had packed methodically, sorting my life into what I could fit in my car and what I would put in storage. The storage unit cost $65 a month. This was a price I would be paying for months. I calculated it into my budget the way I calculated everything now, not as a luxury but as a necessity, another line item in the careful mathematics of staying alive. Noah hugged me at the door. He was 6 years old, and he didn't understand that this was goodbye, that I was not simply going somewhere and coming back. He thought I was just leaving. He asked when he would see me next. Soon, I told him, and I lied, because the alternative was worse. Lauren and Evan did not hug me goodbye. Lauren said she hoped I would find my footing, and that everything would work out. Evan looked ashamed in a way that suggested he understood what was happening even if he couldn't quite admit it. Rachel's apartment was small, a one-bedroom in Aurora that she rented from a woman who was traveling. The couch was comfortable enough. She set me up with sheets and a blanket, and asked me what I needed. A shower, I said. And maybe not to think for a while. I can do that, as she said. I stayed with Rachel for 2 weeks. During that time, I looked at every available rental in Denver and surrounding areas. Everything was beyond my means. I attended apartment showings where landlords looked at me with a specific kind of assessment, calculating whether I was a financial risk. 2 of them rejected my application within 48 hours. The third never responded. On January 10th, I slept in my car for the first time. I had calculated that if I stopped paying for housing, I could buy time. 60 days of car sleeping would preserve enough of my savings to eventually put down on something. The car was a 2017 Mazda CX-5. The back seats folded down. I bought a foam pad and some blankets. I found parking lots where security wouldn't bother me, a 24-hour gym parking lot, an industrial area south of the airport, a hotel lot in a less populated area of I-25. The first night was not as difficult as I expected. The second night was harder. By the third night, I had found a rhythm. I would work at the office during the day. I would go to the gym. I'd purchased a month-long pass, shower, change clothes. I would work some more, either at the office or at coffee shops. Then I would drive to my parking lot and sleep. The physical discomfort was real but manageable. The psychological discomfort was more significant. There was a particular shame in this, even though I knew logically that the shame belonged to Lauren, not to me. There was also a peculiar kind of freedom. Once you've been reduced to the absolute essentials, shelter, work, forward motion, the small anxieties that had once seemed important disappeared. I was sleeping in my car and I was still doing my job well. I was homeless and I was still moving forward. This was what I clung to. I was not failing. The world was simply failing to provide me with options. There was a difference. January was cold. February was colder. I slept through the worst of it, though I wasn't sure if that was luck or simply the numbness that comes from sustained deprivation. I bought a car heater that plugged into the cigarette lighter. I wore layers. I limited my sleeping position to specific configurations that would not wake me with shooting pain in my neck. Rachel checked on me constantly. She would text me, Do you need anything? Do you need a shower? Do you want to come by? She never asked me to explain or justify what had happened. She simply noticed I was in trouble and appeared with practical help. Around the beginning of February, she mentioned that she'd heard of a studio apartment available. The landlord was a woman named Patricia who owned a small building near the Highlands and was known to work with people in difficult situations. The rent was lower than market rate. Patricia waived the security deposit if you agreed to a longer lease. I called Patricia. I met her. She had kind eyes and didn't ask many questions. She offered me the studio, A small box of a room with a window that faced east and got morning light, for $1,200 a month, starting in March. I signed the lease. On March 1st, I moved into my own space for the first time in a year. The studio was perhaps 300 square feet. There was a bed, a small desk, a bathroom, a kitchenette. The window, as promised, got beautiful morning light. I stood in that empty room and felt something break open in my chest that I had been holding closed for months. I sat down on the floor. There was no furniture yet except the bed, and I cried in a way I had not allowed myself to cry since December. It was not the kind of crying that comes from defeat. It was the kind that comes from survival. It was the kind that comes from understanding that you have moved through something and emerged on the other side. The next part of this story would not exist if Evan had not done what he did in May. I was at work, in my office, when he called. I almost didn't answer. By this point, I had a new relationship to my birth family, careful, minimal, bounded. I spoke to my parents occasionally. I had not spoken to Lauren or Evan in over a year. Megan, Evan said when I picked up. I'm sorry to call you at work. It's okay. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong with us. I mean, nothing new. But I need to tell you something, and I should have told you a long time ago. What Evan told me was that Lauren's accusations had been fabrications. They had been designed to accelerate my departure. They had worked perfectly, and once they had served their purpose, Lauren had moved on to other concerns, her new job, her pregnancy, her expanded life. Evan had carried this knowledge for months. It had bothered him. He had mentioned it to Lauren, who had told him to let it go. Eventually, he had decided that silence was complicity, and complicity was not what he wanted to be. I'm sorry, he said. I should have said something sooner. I know I should have. I wasn't brave enough to contradict her, and that was wrong. Yes, I said quietly. It was. For what it's worth, she does feel badly about this now. She wouldn't say so, but I can tell. The babe is here, she's settled into the job, and I think she's realized that what she did was not okay. Feeling badly doesn't undo it, I said. I know. After I hung up, I sat in my office and looked at the mountains, visible through the big north-facing windows, and I understood something. Apologies, after the fact, are often more about the person giving them than the person receiving them. They're about absolution. They're not actually about repair. I could decide whether or not to accept that apology. I could decide whether or not to let it change how I understood what had happened. I decided, that day, that I would do neither. I would simply file this information away as evidence of reality and move forward. Later that May, I received an invitation to Lauren's baby shower. The shower was at a restaurant in Cherry Creek. There were 30 people there. Many of them I had not seen in over a year. They greeted me with the particular awkwardness that comes from not understanding what had happened or why I was not there to witness it. Lauren saw me arrive and stood to embrace me. Her body was already returning to its pre-pregnancy shape. Her hair was expensively cut. Her new job had provided her with a kind of confidence that hadn't been there before. I'm so glad you came, she said, and she sounded like she meant it, which was somehow worse than if she hadn't sounded like she meant it. Later, during the games, Lauren stood and made a speech. She talked about motherhood and partnership and family. She talked about how grateful she was for her village. She talked about how I had chosen to pursue my own path and how much she respected that, how she was so proud of where I had ended up. She had rewritten the story. I had not been pushed out. I had been supported in my independence. I had not been betrayed. I had been liberated. I stood up during that speech. It was quiet. The room didn't go silent. It wasn't that dramatic. But my aunts stopped chatting. My cousins looked up. Rachel, who had come with me, tensed. I appreciate that, I said to Lauren. And I want to say something too. Because there's a version of what happened that is true, and I think it's important that people know it. I moved in with you and Evan when I had nowhere else to go. I paid rent. I cleaned. I helped with Noah. I did all of that. And that was actually fine. I was happy to do it. But when your financial situation improved, when your job came through, you decided you wanted me gone. You told me I had 6 weeks to leave during the worst housing crisis in Denver's history. You made accusations about my behavior that weren't true. You changed the Wi-Fi password. You made me understand that I was no longer welcome. I left because I had to, not because I wanted to. I lived in my car for 2 months. That part is also true. And I'm not saying this to make you feel badly or to ruin this shower. I'm saying it because I need people to know that I survived it, and it had nothing to do with independence and everything to do with the fact that I had to. So, that's my update. The silence that followed was different. It was the kind of silence that comes from truth being stated directly in a space where it was not expected. Lauren's face had gone white. Evan looked down at his plate. My mother looked at me with something like recognition, as though she was seeing me for the first time in a long time. I'm happy for you and the baby, I said to Lauren. I really am. But I'm not going to pretend that what happened between us was okay or generous or supportive. That's all. I sat back down. Rachel's hand found mine under the table. The shower continued. People were uncomfortable. They whispered. But they also, I noticed, looked at me differently. As though they understood, suddenly, that I was not a girl who had needed rescuing. I was a woman who had survived something and was still standing. A year after I moved into my studio apartment, I signed the papers on a condo. It was in the Highlands, a small two-bedroom with original hardwood floors and a kitchen that had been updated recently. There was a balcony that faced east and got morning light. It was everything I had been unable to imagine I could have, and suddenly it was simply real. I had saved enough for the down payment. My credit was perfect. My job was secure. My boss had promoted me to senior designer. I had built this. Alone, without family support or rescue. I had built this through calculation and discipline, and the particular kind of resilience that comes from having no other choice. Lauren called when my parents told her I had bought the condo. That's amazing, she said, and she sounded like she meant it. Thank you, I said. I know I haven't reached out in a while. I want you to know that I'm really sorry about everything. The way I handled your leaving. I was scared and overwhelmed and I took it out on you. That was wrong. I let that apology sit between us for a moment. I thought about all the ways I could respond to it. I thought about forgiveness and reconciliation and the narratives I'd been told about what healing should look like. I appreciate you saying that, I said. I don't know if I'm in a place to move past what happened, but I appreciate the apology. Is there anything I can do? No, I said. There isn't. The time for helping was then. This is just how things are now. After I hung up, I sat on my apartment floor, my apartment that would soon be my condo, and I understood something that I don't think I would have understood before. Forgiveness is not always the appropriate response to betrayal. Sometimes the appropriate response is maintenance of boundaries. Sometimes healing looks like distance. Sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is simply decide to live well, with or without the participation of the people who hurt you. The condo closing happened on a Tuesday. I signed documents in a lawyer's office. I was given keys. I drove to my new place and stood in the empty living room and felt the particular kind of peace that comes from having built something that belongs to you, that no one can take from you, that is wholly and completely your own. Rachel came over that night with wine and take-out Chinese food. We sat on my floor in my new place and she told me she was proud of me, and I believed her because she had earned the right to say it. She had shown up when it mattered. She had offered practical help without judgment. She had seen me at my worst and decided I was worth knowing anyway. "What are you going to do with the bedrooms?" She asked. "One is an office. I'm thinking about doing some freelance design work. The other one is just a room. A guest room, I guess. For people who need it." Rachel smiled. "That's very generous." "It's practical," I said. "I know what it's like to not have a place to land. If I'm ever in a position to provide that, I want to." This is the part of the story where I could tell you about confrontation or vindication or some dramatic reversal. I could tell you about Lauren's business collapsing or her coming to me for help and me turning her away with theatrical satisfaction. I could craft an ending that provides clear moral punishment and clear moral reward. That's not what happened. What happened is that life continued. Lauren and Evan's marriage remained intact, but perhaps less joyful than they expected. They had 2 more children. Their income expanded and contracted based on the unpredictable nature of their respective fields. Sometimes they seemed happy in photos. Sometimes they seemed stressed. I spoke to them occasionally. We were cordial. There were no more accusations, but there was also no real intimacy. The thing that had broken between us did not repair, not entirely. Some things don't. My relationship with my parents shifted. They apologized for believing Lauren's version of events without asking me for mine. My father, in particular, seemed to carry some guilt about this. I told them that I understood. They had believed what they were told by someone they trusted. That was human. But I also didn't pretend that the apology erased what had happened. It existed. They had failed me. We would move forward anyway, with this knowledge in the foundation between us. Rachel became my sister in all the ways that matter. We traveled together. We supported each other through bad relationships and good ones. We celebrated each other's professional wins. When I was afraid, she showed up. When she was afraid, I showed up. This is the family I chose, and it has been stronger and more durable than the family I was born into. My career thrived. I became known in Denver's design community for my work on commercial projects. I started taking on bigger clients. I consulted on restaurant openings and tech offices and architectural firms. I built a reputation for reliability and vision and the kind of quiet excellence that doesn't need to announce itself. My condo was perfect, and then it needed work, and then I did the work. I learned how to lay tile and paint walls and make decisions about fixtures and finishes that reflected who I had become. I filled my home with light and color and objects I had chosen because they meant something to me, not because they were impressive. I dated. I had relationships. I had my heart broken and I healed. I learned that my capacity for trust had been affected by what happened with Lauren. I was more cautious, more observant, slower to assume good intention. This was not necessarily a bad thing. It was the cost of what I had learned. Sometimes I would drive past the house in the suburb where I had lived for 9 months. It looked smaller than I remembered it. At some point, Lauren and Evan had the landscaping updated. The garden looked expensive and maintained. I never saw them outside it. I thought about those 9 months often. I thought about the moment I heard them discussing how to remove me. I thought about the winter months in my car and the particular kind of loneliness that comes from being homeless while still having a job, still being functional, still appearing normal. I thought about the moment I stood up at the baby shower and told the truth. What I don't think about much is anger. The anger that would be appropriate, that would be justified, that served its purpose and then it didn't. Anger would have required me to stay connected to them, to stay focused on their responsibility for what happened. I needed to move away from that focus. I needed to move toward my own life, my own choices, my own reflection of who I was when the circumstantial pressures were removed. This is what I learned from all of it. Your family of origin can hurt you. They can betray you. They can use you when you're useful and discard you when you're not. And you can survive that. You can more than survive. You can build something beautiful on the other side of it. You can choose your family. You can create stability and dignity and boundaries. You can own your own home and your own life and your own story. The ending is not the part where everything is reconciled. The ending is the part where you understand that you don't need it to be reconciled. You can hold what happened with clarity. You can acknowledge the truth of your pain without letting that pain define your future. You can extend compassion toward people who hurt you while still maintaining absolute clarity about what they did. And you can wake up in your own space, in a room that gets morning light, and feel the particular kind of peace that comes from having built something that is wholly, completely, undeniably your own. I can do that now. I do that every day.